Welcome back, Streamer Nation. I'm your host, Michael Simeone, and you're listening to the SP Streamer Podcast, part of the Fantrax and FantraxHQ.com family. Today, we have a guest. He is basically the master of FAAB. He writes a daily article for SP Streamer. He is a high-stakes fantasy baseball player as well, and that is Todd Whitestone. What's going on, Todd?
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the intro. I don't think I'm the master of FAAB, though, but...
well, you study it the most.
Okay. I'll buy that.
Yeah, for those who don't know Todd, I forgot to say an intro because I'm terrible. You can follow him on Twitter at Telestar7. So if you want to go follow him there, you can. This way you see his articles during the week, or you can check out our website, spstreamer.com. All right, Todd. So before we really get into FAAB or anything, I kind of want to ask you about your 2021 fantasy baseball season. I did have the pleasure of actually sitting next to you in person at a draft. That was a main event live in New York City. I went with Rob DiPietro, and that was because he just wanted me. So he wanted me to come with him to the draft to be his, just kind of follow news as the draft was happening because spring training was playing.
Right.
And my laptop, for some reason, I brought my wife's, and she neglected to tell me that her laptop won't connect to Wi-Fi outside her house for some reason. And I couldn't figure it out there. So I basically couldn't help Rob except refresh on my phone and make sure nothing was happening.
Right.
So I didn't help him much. But anyway, I got to sit next to you. You were next to us. You were pick number 2. I think Rob plays second in that league. How'd you do in that league?
I think he might. Did he win that league? I think he might have won that league. Anyway.
Oh, did he? You could be right.
The funny thing was that was my worst league in 2021 by far. My first pick, Rob went with Jacob deGrom as the number 1.
Yep.
I took Ronald Acuna, which looked great in April. And then I followed it up with, I think it was Clayton Kershaw and somebody else that got hurt. I had my top 3 picks all were out injured.
Oh, geez.
Anyway, so, but yeah, it was great to be next to you guys because I hadn't met either of you in person. Yep. And the funny part that Rob and I laugh about is he was so prepared for his picks. He took 2 in a row within about 5 seconds of each other. And so then I was back ready. It was my turn to pick before I was really ready. And I still picked who I wanted to. That's no excuse. But it was just kind of funny that he was just so fired up. Yeah.
Yeah, he just knew. That's what's great about the way he drafts too. I mean, not to reveal any secrets or anything, but he knows who he wants and he knows who he likes. And as it's coming up, he sees who's coming up and, ADP or whatever, who he's got to jump where. And he knew as soon, but before you were picking in front of him on the way back, he already knew.
Exactly.
Unless you stole someone, which I think happened once or twice. So.
Yes, I did take one guy. Who was it? That turned out to be a very bad pick.
I don't know.
I forget who it was, but
anyway, I don't remember. But you did steal some. So how many leagues are you playing this year?
So in 2021, I played in 9 NFBC leagues, and that's pretty tough competition, as we know. But there were 3 main events. That one that I was in with you guys, I finished 12th. And then I also got a 4th, which is no money, but was pretty good result. And then I did get a 3rd place, which does get money. So that was good. And then I did 4 online championships, of which I got 5th, 4th, 3rd, which none of which gets money. But the 4th team, Michael, I got. We not only won the league, but we finished in 8th place overall.
Oh, okay.
Which was really fantastic. Yeah, it was a great. My partner was James Anderson from RotoWire, and he's a great player, and he humors me sometimes, but we did a good job together, and especially on that team.
That's good. And that cashes out overall, right? Top 8.
So yeah, that cashed a fairly nice amount.
Good.
And then the last 2 NFBC leagues were auction leagues. One of which was Rob drafting for Phil Dussault.
So you lost that league.
That was just a lucky guess by you. But, yes, Phil surprisingly won that league, and I actually finished second to him.
Oh, okay.
So,
so basically, you in your brain, you really came in first because
among the mortal players, I
yes.
feel like I won. So, but yeah, that was so out of each little discipline that I'm telling you about, auction, online, and main, we had one cashing in each one, and that worked out beautifully as far as I was concerned. One really great finish in an online, and one experience against Phil, and so it was a successful year as far as I was concerned, and I enjoyed it. Certainly, always enjoyed the NFBC leagues.
Yeah. How long have you been playing?
So fantasy in general, I've been playing for over 20 years, but and in the NFBC, I think my first league was the 2012.
Wow.
But then I took a couple years off, Michael, and then I don't think my next baseball league was till 2015. And then since then, I've played every year.
How many years have you done the main event?
Since 2015.
Okay.
So about 6-7 years in the main events, and it's been an educational experience. I mean, in the beginning, I probably wasn't ready to be in it, as a lot of people have said. But now, at least I kind of know what I'm in for. I'm not going to say I'm ready and I'm so set above anybody else, but at least you have a lay of the land. You have kind of know how this thing is going to go, which is a big advantage compared to the first year.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I'm sure. All right, so let's get on to FAAB, what we came here to talk about. So you did a weekly article for spstreamer.com, released it every week. Can you just explain a little bit, or I guess summarize what that article was, what it entailed, and all that kind of stuff?
Sure, Michael. So there were two goals for that article, Michael. One was to follow the sort of the competition of the main event. Since it was 43 leagues, it's kind of like something that you can get your arms around. It's not like the RotoWire Online Championship where there's so many teams that you just, you can't even keep track of what everybody's doing. This is 43 leagues, 15 teams each. There's a finite number, and we could sort of keep tabs on it and not only see who is leading the overall, but also see who is leading the individual league. So I thought there weren't a lot of articles following that and doing that. There are a lot of articles about, players and pickups and who to drop and which statistics actually, are undervalued or things like that. So I thought that was a unique aspect. And then the second thing was to follow it to the point of, what are these players doing in terms of FAAB as sort of as a group? How are they treating it? How are they spending? Are they going after mostly a certain type of player? Things like that, just to get a sense from these who are generally the top players. I'm not going to say there's no top players in home leagues or other competitions, but these guys, they pay a lot of money and they don't drop out in July or August when they're behind. And, so it's a good league to study. And I thought it might be helpful to do that.
Yeah, I thought you had a different take on it. And I know I had something similar in mind. And then when you reached out to me to write for SP Streamer, and your idea was, I think, a lot better than mine. And I thought it was a great idea. And I felt like it was just interesting because, you could track those trends and stuff that people aren't really focusing on. Like you said, every FAAB article right now is, what player to look at, how much percentage of your budget should you spend on them, that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, you're looking at, who's kind of like the moves that are being made and who's doing what. And I guess it's a good way to figure out maybe, what's the best way to address FAAB. So one of the things you did do in the article, which I really loved and found super interesting, you did it for, I want to say like half the season or towards until the end. And then I think you stopped it to address other things in the article. But you tracked FAAB moves where you then looked back, I think it was 4 weeks later. Is that right? 4 weeks?
It was the top 4 players over the first 3 weeks after they were acquired.
Right. So what was like the success rate overall, or did you only really track ones that were where people spent a lot of money?
No,
Or you did the most ads? How'd you do?
It was by the most ads. You're right.
Okay.
It was about, so if a player was picked up in all 43 leagues, that generally assured that he was going to be part of my analysis.
Okay.
I didn't, for the purposes of that study, I didn't really take into consideration the dollar amounts.
Okay.
But generally, the guys that are picked up in 40, 41, 42 leagues are the guys getting the higher dollar amounts anyway. But yes, I did it for the whole season. I looked at the top 4 players over the first 3 weeks, and the idea was, it's great to get a FAAB acquisition that can be great for the whole season or to judge how he is for the whole season. But if you get a guy that really helps you in the first 3 weeks after you get him, first of all, he's definitely in your lineup for those 3 weeks. And second of all, you've it's found money for you. That's found value. So I wanted to just look at that and not get caught up in 4 months later, was he still producing for that team? So I did that. And the interesting result was I put them into 3 buckets, Michael. One was it a thumbs up acquisition? Did it really help the fantasy team over that? And there wasn't any absolute formula, but I think it was pretty obvious when I looked at the stats. And so there were 22 players, or 24%, that were thumbs up.
Wow.
And these were pretty obvious plus players. And the interesting thing about these percentages is they stayed the same for almost the whole year. It wasn't like it gradually got better, gradually got worse. It was the same. So 24% thumbs up, about 27% that were mediocre. They were a little bit okay, but not great. Didn't really hurt you too badly. And then there were 49% or 45% that were bad. They were just absolute, drags. And I was surprised by that because, first of all, yes, it is a 15-team league, but these are the best players, in fantasy, and their hit rate is maybe 25% for good or 50% for just helping you a little. And that was that opened my eyes a little bit. I thought it would be much better, and I felt like that showed that it is a little bit of a crapshoot when a guy comes in. He may have a hot week, or he may be a rookie, and you just say, "Well, I'm going to really try to add him, and he's going to help me for sure if I do get him." But that's not really true.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just a testament to how hard baseball is. I mean, to predict, it's just basically impossible. And we had actually Josh on last week, and he said, he said that there's nothing to prove that if you add a hot player that they'll continue to be hot. They can, but it's impossible to predict when that hot streak will end, really.
Sure.
So I think, that's what makes FAAB a lot of the times hard is you're picking up players who maybe are increasing, play time, but then that ends up going away. There's just so many factors. Yeah. And I would love to look at, we obviously don't have the answer right now, but I wonder how much more successful Phil was during the season compared to the rest of the league. That'd be interesting. That'd be interesting to look at. Okay. So I know you also tracked, FAAB bids over $100, over $200. Do you know, or if you had to guess off the top of your head just by doing it, were most of those bids you think successful, or do you think they probably weren't necessarily successful either? Well, I know a lot of people spent money on who I think Merriweather it was, and there were some other crazy ones that I know just didn't pan out. But do you think that those big money FAAB editions were a little more successful than the other most added cheaper ones that you tracked kind of?
So I did do a study on that, but before I just want to add to what Josh told you, which is I agree completely with his conclusion. The only thing I will say in defense of the player that has the good week or two is I think he's got a little bit of a grace period for getting playing time because he's been hot. So I think that's what you're buying a little bit. Like the guy that hit 500 the previous week, the manager's not going to take him out of the lineup generally for an 0 for 8.
Right.
So I think that's the only thing, but I do agree.
Very good point.
You don't have any idea when he's going to get cold. But the study that I did was not exactly what you said, but it was similar. I looked at the heavy spending only for the first 10 FAAB periods, because I thought first of all, that's when most of the heavy spending occurred, because guys had most of the money.
Right.
And then they had to attract at least 10 bids over $100 to be in my study. So that meant, and there were a few players that stuck out, but generally at the beginning, there were some guys that just people went in for heavy. And we all remember the names if we sat here and listed them. But there were 13 guys in that first 2 months that had heavy spending of that nature. And some of them were way more than 10 bids over $100. There were 5 starters and 5 relievers. One of them was Merriweather that you mentioned. And what I decided to do, Michael, was I looked at where did the teams finish, not that got these guys at a relative bargain, but the guys that bid the most for them. The ones over, I think it was the top 10 bids for each player. So, because I wanted to, because you know that feeling when a guy's coming on, he's going to be expensive, and you say to yourself, geez, I should just empty the bank account and get this guy. I know he's going to be good. Yeah, and so let's see how did that work? Because some players do that. Some players bid $500, $600, $300, whatever. So I put them into 3 buckets: the teams that finished in the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third. And it turned out that out of that group, those 13 players, 75% of those teams finished in the middle or bottom third. And you'd expect, of course, random nature would tell you it'd be 66%. So it did drag down on average. And I said, okay, well, maybe the answer is that out of those 13 guys, there were too many busts, and that was just the way it fell this year. And if you just could know the way that Phil Dussault knows who the good players are, you would find out a much different result. And so what I took out everybody but the 6 players that I graded the best. So there were 6 out of the 13 that got the best grade as additions. They did really well over the first 3 weeks and really well even for the season. Okay. And if you just limited it to that, you'd say, well, now it's going to get better, right? There were 73% of those teams that finished in the middle or bottom third.
Wow.
Well, even then, they spent heavy. They got a good player, but they didn't really, on average, help their cause.
Because in the long run, they got less money to spend on other acquisitions.
They got less money, and they tied up. Yes, it was a combination of things, but still, it didn't work for most of those teams. And there were very few. I think also I looked at how many were in the cash money positions, which would be the top 3. And this is main event only, by the way. I'm only talking about the main event. So the top 3 would be 20% of the league. And the top 3 was more like 13% of the teams that did this finished in the money. So you'd expect 20% and you got 13. So as a strategy, I would have to say, based on 2021, it didn't work, even when you just look at the guys that really helped in terms of the players.
Now, I don't mean to keep bringing Phil up. It's almost impossible in talking about this stuff, but I think I heard him on a podcast say somewhere that he doesn't like to go over, I think, $70-ish dollars. So based on what you saw, I mean, would you tend to agree that no matter how much you want a player, it's just not worth it to go over, say, $100 on a single player, just because it ends up kind of killing you in the long run?
I'm not sure if 100 would be the cutoff, but I would say that you're much better spreading out your FAAB. And we can get back to what I saw as the FAAB trend over the main event over the year. But yeah, I don't think there's a hard and fast cutoff. But like if you look at Alek Manoah, who I spent 300 or something on, and I got him, it might be worth it to bid 100 and 150 and just say, I'm probably not going to get him.
But by chance.
That's a great bargain. I can still try for him there. But maybe you don't spend 300 or 400 at any time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that would be my advice. Again, it's got to be different based on your situation, but still, especially early in the year. Early in the year, I think it's hard to justify that kind of bid.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I mean, did you see people spending a lot more earlier in the year? Yeah. I mean, obviously, I feel like that's kind of a given because obviously as time goes on, the less money these players have anyway.
Definitely.
So what about like the final, I would say, week or even final couple of weeks? Did you see, I mean, I've heard a lot of players, and it's a really smart strategy where at that point you're literally trying to get any edge you can. So you're technically dropping even some of your starters who are having tough schedules coming up for guys that, you just literally need for like a week or two. So was there a lot more movement at the end of the season compared to like the rest of the year?
Well, I don't know. Maybe some players are doing that. Other players are becoming less active even in the main event. So it sort of balances out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, Phil Dussault's famous drop of Jacob deGrom when, he didn't know what he was going to get out of him, that, you got to be willing at a certain point to let go of an asset when it's not helping you and there's a limited chance he's going to do it for you later this season.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think there's a certain point at which you have to drop the being patient approach and say, I just need some stats. I did look at the average amount spent per team per week, and it started out, of course, at $50 per team at the first full week. And for the first 6 weeks, Michael, it was like over $30 each week. So it was pretty heavy. And then all of a sudden, people got a little bit of religion and dropped into the low 20s, early high teens. And that persisted for like 5 weeks. And then it dropped into the low teens, for about the next 7 or 8 weeks. So there's sort of a cutoff point. And my advice for people listening, probably this is worthwhile even outside of NFBC leagues, is to sort of withstand the urge to spend heavy the first 6 weeks and really build up a little bit more. And then, like you said, bid $60 or $70 when you want a player after week 7, but expect you're not going to get the big acquisitions in the first 6 weeks and just steel yourself to that, because your draft should be good enough to carry you the first 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a theory.
It's tough because you think about the players that you could have added at the beginning of the year, like the Robbie Ray, Carlos Rodon, right. You know what I mean? So it's just like, but probably you probably could have used that money at a later time as well. And then plus you're not always going to hit on that. You're going to guess on a player too. And if you miss, pretty much you're done.
330 on there was a guy that bid $330 on Carlos Carrasco when it looked like he was going to be on the comeback trail, and somebody had dropped him. So it was just a one league event. But that's a killer, when you spend on that, and he didn't produce for that owner at all.
So were you able to look into specifically rookies? And
no, I didn't do that.
Okay. But I was curious if like them and or relievers, how often that kind of works out in terms of bidding or high bids. I would assume it didn't work out that great this year because I felt like we didn't have a lot of good ones. I'm sure a lot of people spent a lot on Kelnick and stuff, and just obviously didn't pan out.
He was drafted. He was drafted. So
he was drafted a lot.
For the most part, people held him for most of the year. But if you look at a guy like Manoah, he actually performed pretty well.
Right.
but I still don't think it panned out to pay the big money. I mean, the relievers, they pop up, and for the people that want them, you have to spend a lot of money. I don't think, on balance, if you say let's look at just the reliever acquisitions, that most of them really came through. The Lou Trevino is the notable exception, that he actually produced for a good part of the year, but a lot of the other people that looked like they were going to get the closer gig, and then maybe got one save or maybe didn't get any, and people were spending $100 to $200 on some of these guys. I mean, Lucas Sims, remember?
Yeah.
There was like 2 or 3 times when he came up and people were saying, hey, this is the week to get Lucas Sims, and it just never really happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, it's the smart thing to do is be a little more on the conservative side and not spend that big money. And I mean, again, the numbers you gave us, the people who did that didn't really fare too well in their leagues. So I think that's definitely some good advice to go off of.
Yeah.
Now, in this article, you also track the main event every week, the leaders and all that kind of stuff. So I just want to get a quick couple shout outs, I guess. We keep mentioning Phil Dussault for those who don't know who that is. And if you're listening to this podcast, Phil Dussault basically won every league, he did win, I think, or
every
placed
league that
in every
entered,
single league that he entered. He won the main event overall. He won the auction overall, right? Yeah. And then he came in second overall for online championship, I think, correct?
I'm not sure if he was second or third, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. So amazing season. One, Todd, what are your thoughts on it? 2, do you think it's the best season ever?
I mean,
in NFBC history.
Yeah, I don't see anything to compare. The Lindy Hinkleman that people bring up was a much smaller, number of teams. And while it was amazing, I just feel like, Phil just dominated every aspect, every type of league that he entered. And it was great. I mean, he had a core group of players, Michael, and he stuck to them, and they all pretty much came through. And I sort of marvel at that, because if you just said to me, okay, going into 2022, pick 10 players, you can pick any 10 players you want. And are they all going to come through? And I could mostly go in first, second, and third round. And I guarantee you that some of them would not come through, and I'm not going to say he had 0 busts. I mean, he had a few that didn't work out, but he had enough Kevin Gausmans and other players that just really, really absolutely held him up there. And he did it. He was strong enough to do it in a variety of leagues. He didn't just say, okay, now I'm going to change it up, and I'm not going to go for Gausman in this league. I'm going to go, I want these guys in every league. And that's something not everybody does. So anyway, long story short, yes, Phil, greatest fantasy season I've ever seen. And
so it was really interesting. I went to First Pitch Arizona, and they did a little panel on NFBC, and obviously they brought him up, and Rob Silver had a really good interpretation of, I guess you could say, of how he drafted. And if you actually look at the middle rounds, that's where he really profited. Yeah. It wasn't even the first, 5 or 7 picks. Yeah. I mean, he did profit slightly, but it was those middle rounds where he really, and, basically the overall lesson to be learned there was we focus too much on those early rounds where we really need to be focusing on the middle to later rounds, because that's really where you find your profit and can win your league. Absolutely. So he did that tremendously well, and was really good. So again, you tracked the standings a lot. Were there any other players who performed really well that were obviously overshadowed by Phil? And if you could just shout some of them out.
Yeah, I wanted to mention a few of them, but Phil won. He had entered 3 main events, and he won all 3. Okay, fine. Tyler Young also entered 3 main events and won all 3. A couple of them were really easy wins for him. Clark Olson, I think, entered 5 main events. He had 1 win and 3 second places, I believe.
Wow.
Abdul Madani, he won the overall main event, I think 2 years ago. He had 2 firsts and a second this year. Brian Slack had one first and one tie for first, and also a third place in main event. So that's pretty amazing. And then the three other guys I would mention would be Alan Mitchell. He had two guys in the overall top 20, two teams rather. Andrew Geller and Dave Chauvin. They also did really well, won leagues, had other teams that were in the top three. It's just, it makes you think, Michael, that you think, well, it's just random, and maybe you have one team that's good and one team not so good. But these guys are doing so consistently well that you can see they're doing something different than even the average main event owner who is pretty darn smart themselves. So I have to tip my cap to them, and you gotta, this is why you gotta really be ready when you enter one of these main events, because if you have two or three of those guys in your league, it's just really tough. It's really tough to do it, to compete.
I mean, Phil, we always joke Phil's going to have to enter leagues as the last person to enter because everyone's going to be running out of them otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of standings and movement, if you had to say, I mean, because I think it's tough to tell. I mean, I know for myself, I mean, I just did DCs, but like I was probably about middle of the pack heading into like after the All-Star break. And I was really worried. I was like, I guess I'm never going to get there. And luckily I ended up coming up and cashing in majority of them. Right. But I mean, at what point would you say like you really need to be in contention? At like what point in the season? I mean, is it tough to get a lot of movement with say like 2 months left of the year?
With 2 months, I would say that the general answer to your question is it's later than you think.
Definitely.
You think you're out of it or a team is out of it, but it's really not true because I followed all 43 leagues to some extent. I won't say in intimate detail. And there was some pretty dramatic movement even in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. So I would say with 2 months to go, I would say you have to be somewhere in the middle to have a chance. I mean, now, is it better to be in the top 2 places? Of course. Those teams held on more often than not. But are you completely out of it in 7th place out of 15? No, I don't think so. And I think that the cutoff for me is more like with 3 weeks to go or so, you need to be within 10 points of the lead. And I think I could find teams, even Michael, even beyond that came from further than 10 back to win. But I would say that you want to at least be there. I mean, because you're looking at a 5% or less chance if you are further than 10 away. And there was one league where, for example, with 3 days to go, a guy had a 1-point lead and he lost by 4.5 points in the last 3 days. So it depends a little bit, as you could probably imagine, on how bunched up the stats are. Some leagues, they're so spread out that it's really hard to catch. In other leagues, maybe the batting average, there's 7 teams within, 1 percentage point. And if you come out on top of that pile, you can really move up. But yeah, I think the main thing for people to remember is it's much later than you think. If it's July 1st and you're sort of lagging, you shouldn't feel like, well, this is a lost cause.
Yeah, definitely agree. And like I said, I kind of experienced that myself, which was nice. So before we go here, Todd, real quick, I mean, you've played in a bunch of main events. We talked about you've been in this for a while. What is some advice you would give for people who are going to be first-year players in the main event coming into 2022?
Well, don't get in Phil DeSouza. No, I'm just kidding.
That's definitely one piece of advice.
I think that's advice for me. I don't know if that's advice for anybody else. No, I think the number one thing is you assemble a balanced roster for any FAAB league that's really competitive, because you don't want to be, way behind in saves or steals or batting average. It's just a killer to be, in 15th place and getting almost no points. That's really hard to overcome.
Yeah.
Number two is what we talked about, is conserve your FAAB early. Try not to give into the urge of, I got to have player A, because there's a 50% chance that player's going to completely bust, and another 25% that he's not going to even help that much, even though the name sounds great right then. And then I would say, what else did I write down? Oh, and I would say to stay active throughout, and what you and I were discussing about not giving up and saying, well, Alek Manoah is going for so much, I really can't get him, so I'm not going to even put a bid in. You put a bid in, you need a starting pitcher, you put in 5 players in your waterfall, and lo and behold, you might get the guy for $1 at the end that might turn out to be really helpful. So if you stay active and you look carefully at the free agents, you can really help yourself, as opposed to saying, well, I'm just going to go for Manoah and that's it. I'm not going to really bother with these other guys. So if you do those 3 things, I think you can really, help your cause. And also, you listen to podcasts, you listen to the people that seem to give you good advice and are on the same wavelength as you. I think everybody can find those type of helpful, people on a website or on a podcast, and it's just stick with it. You'll get better. I was pretty bad my first year, and look, I actually cashed 3 leagues this year, and one was really, really a good performance. So, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun if you look at it as fun, Michael. I
mean,
when you're 12th place on July 1st, it doesn't.
It's not that fun. Especially when you're putting up that kind of money for a main event league.
You got to look at it as it's lost money once you've done your entry fee, and you're just trying to do the best you can. You paid for the privilege of entering and doing the FAAB, so do the FAAB, do the work.
Oh yeah, yep. You'll get out of it what you put into it.
Exactly.
So, all right, some really good advice, some really good stuff on FAAB, Todd. Thank you for coming on.
Sure.
You will be doing this weekly next season, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Planning on it.
Are you bringing anything new? Do you have any new ideas, or you think you're going to just kind of run it back the same?
I think I'm going to run mostly back, but I think it'll be interesting to compare. Maybe I can do a little more comparison of 22 to 21. Yes. And I'm a little concerned that the main event might be bigger even than 43 leagues, and might start to get beyond my scope to really handle the individual leagues very much.
Yeah.
But even if I can't do that, I think
just run the overall.
Yeah, like run the overall, and see, like, the FAAB is trending that they're not spending as much this year, or something that can help players sort of adjust before they have all the information from the more common sources.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. I mean, even a couple weeks in, even you could see the differences. So that'll be interesting to see.
And one other thing, I will look at the 4 players and their first 3 weeks, and maybe the acquisitions will get better. Maybe this was just a year that was off for some reason. I'll be interested in that and seeing whether maybe 50% bust was unusual.
Yeah. I think you'll find out some pretty cool stuff by tracking it as the years go on. Even it's catch trends, stuff like that, and no one else is doing it from what I know. So I think it's really cool what you're doing. Really good niche idea. Kind of like what we do with streamers. So
I think we got a lot of readers that were in the main event, Michael, and were saying that the information we were providing was not easily findable anywhere else, and that sort of meant a lot to me, and I think that's why we got a strong readership weekly, for it. So definitely. I'm hoping that works for us next year.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm sure a lot of people will read it again. For those who are listening, you want to follow Todd, follow him on Twitter at Telestar7. Again, you'll see his articles out every week during the season. If you are listening, please rate and review us on iTunes. It means a ton. And also, don't forget to check out our draft kit, which is out for pre-order right now until February. And check out our website, sbstreamer.com. And thank you all for listening. We will be back next week with a new guest, and Lauren should be back as well. So keep a lookout for that as well. So again, thanks for listening, guys, and we will talk to you soon.